Very well, my friends, let's keep going here with our mantle cloth or tablecloth, and in Spanish we call it mantel. That's why I was messing up there. But I was mentioning that there are certain physical properties that we need to take into account when we're creating our garments here inside of Marvelous Designer. I might, by the way, I just might like make the mistake of saying Substance Painter and Marvelous Designer because I think about Substance Designer, but anyway. So we're gonna go over here to the ellipse tool, and I'm gonna start drawing an ellipse. As you can see, it's very like ugly looking. If you press Shift, of course, you're gonna get a very straight ellipse. So let's go right around there, 2300. That seems good. And over here, of course, on our 2D window, I'm gonna try to make this thing be as clean or as like perfectly aligned as possible. And let's simulate. So as you can see, the simulation is giving us a very nice detail. Like we get some very nice wrinkles there, but it's definitely heavy, right? Like you can see how the elements and the particles are having a little bit of an issue trying to correct all of the elements. So how can we improve the animation? Well, the amount of triangles that you're going to have for your particles will be dependent. I'm going to select this wireframe on surface, will be dependent on something called particle distance, because technically what you're seeing right here, it's not meshes. They're not triangles like we normally think of triangles when we're doing like a modeling. These are particles, and we're getting this sort of like triangle shade to be able to see them. But each particle has a specific distance between each other. And you can see if I select this pattern right here, that if I go to the property editor, we got all of these properties over here. We got the selected lines, and then we got the simulation properties, which is the most important thing that I want to talk about right now. So the particle distance is how big or how small the triangles are going to be. The smaller the distance, the smaller the triangles, the more like precise the simulation is going to be, but also the stronger or more difficult it will be for the software to find out the proper like correlation. So in this case, if we were to go, let's say to 40, what's going to happen, as you can see right here, is now we got the way less particles, and it's going to be a little bit easier to just like manipulate and move our elements around. So what's my advice here? Well, if you're working on a simulation and you feel like you're having a little bit of an issue trying to get it to behave the way you want, try lowering the elements first so you can get this sort of like a blocking of the animation first. And once you're happy with how it looks, then we can move on to increasing the simulation. One thing that you're going to notice is the higher the particle distance, the more overlapping of these things you're going to get. Again, very, very common. So as soon as I bring this down to, let's say 30, and I simulate again, you're going to see that a lot of those like overlapping elements are going to be solved. Again, for this sort of things, just like try to pinch them or pull them out. And if this definitely does not work, just stop the simulation and move the element up a little bit so that it can set back down into your object. So yeah, this is it. That's one of the main things about the properties that I wanted to talk about. The fabric is definitely very, very dark. Let's go for a lighter color for now. There we go. So now, if we have this color right here, or rather, if we have this pattern right here, and we want to change a couple of things about the pattern, we can change things such as the pressure, which I'm going to talk about in not this exercise, but in the next one. We can change this thing called the shrinkage weft and shrinkage warp. And this one I do want to talk about. So the fabric that we do is normally made by a bunch of threads, right? That are going in horizontal and vertical direction, or vertical and horizontal direction. And they interlock between each other, creating this sort of like grid pattern. So the weft talks about the horizontal axis, and the warp talks about the vertical axis. So you can imagine that if I have this clothing right here, there's a lot of threads going, again, across the shape. If I decrease the shrinkage weft, what's going to happen on the horizontal axis, it's that it's going to try to collapse a little bit more. It's going to be way, way, way more tense. And you can see it right here. Let me set this to like 50, and you're going to see that then on a horizontal axis, this thing is going to shrink. Do we see it? Oh, I just had it. There we go. 50. There we go. So see how that kind of like shrunk together? Again, only on the horizontal axis. If I were to set that on the vertical axis as well, everything's going to shrink again, and we're going to get a very sort of like tense clothing. This usually happens when you wash a cloth that shouldn't be washed, and due to the heat, the threads kind of like tense or bunch up a little bit more. So why is this useful? Why do we need to have this sort of like a weft and warp element? Well, sometimes if you're doing this sort of like sport, like a spandex sort of clothing, you might want the properties of the simulation to be a little bit tighter to the body. Or sometimes, like what I'm about to do right here, we can actually make this thing go the other way around, 150 on the weft and 150 on the warp. And what's going to happen is everything's going to become way, way looser. Look at that. So even though we have the same amount of volume or of surface, thanks to the weft and the warp, we can change how that shrinkage is working. So as you can see, this looks kind of like a ball, sort of like or like a dancing hall tablecloth that goes very, very low into the ground. So yeah, that's pretty much the shrinkage, weft and shrinkage warp. Sorry, weft and warp. So there we go. So we can change again those properties along with the particle distance to generate different results in our element. But that's not all, and I want to talk about a couple of things right here. So the next thing that we can take a look at is the way in which the elements are attached to each other. What do I mean by this? Well, if we go again to this element, to the wireframe on surface, you're going to see that all of the triangles are just kind of like randomly split across the whole surface of the element. Well, similarly to how modeling works with support edges and bevels and things like that, when we're working with clothing here inside of Marvel's Designer, we can use internal lines to generate a different effect on how things are going to look. So let's say we wanted to add, for instance, a trim right here on the border. Usually, if you take a look at your t-shirt, there's usually this sort of like hem, I believe it's called, which is like the loop that goes around your t-shirt or your dress or whatever, so that the fibers do not get like all unstitched or anything. And that we can create those. We can go here. I'm going to select all of the lines right here with this selection transform point segment tool. And then if I right click, I can use this option called offset as internal line. Okay, I'm going to give this 50 millimeters, which is like quite aggressive. And I'm going to hit OK. And what that will do, as you can see right here, is it will insert a line, an internal line that will change, and this is very important, it will change the flow of the clothing along your element. You can see how a lot of the triangles right here are now colliding on that element, on that line. And this is pretty much the same thing as creating a support line. So if you want your cloth to fold in a specific direction, if you want to have a specific crevice on certain areas or a specific line, internal lines like the one that we just created here are going to be very important to generate just that. Okay, so the way, again, the particle distance, the way the lines are created, the weft and the warp, all of those things are going to contribute to the way in which our cloth is going to be looking here inside of our element. Now, that's not all. Let's keep going. We're gonna kick this up a notch. So I'm gonna grab all of this guys right here, okay? And I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna do an option called cut and sew. It's right here. So what this does, it divides both patterns. So now the circle pattern, which I can select right here and move it to the side, is gonna be separated from this trim pattern. We've done this before, right? I'm actually gonna go back to this initial fabric. Let me turn this into this sort of like golden orange color or something. And I'm gonna select the pattern right here, just apply the color so that we can see it. So cool, we're creating a little bit of a fancy trim, which we know later on in texturing we can change with gold or silver or something to make this way more fancy. Actually, I think it's on the next video I'm gonna be showing you how to use substance materials, which are very cool. So that's gonna be nice. So this one right here needs something, just a little bit of something extra. And this is something that, again, you're gonna be seeing quite a bit in the in like patterns, or again, if we look for tablecloth fancy, right? You're gonna see that some of this like very fancy tablecloths, they will have this sort of like border that's a little bit more puffed than others. All of them are gonna have this sort of like hem. I'm looking for one of those like puffy, like a party sort of like elements. You might see it on some of like the super fancy silk ones, like this one right here. Can see that blue line. So sometimes what's going to happen is you're going to have one fabric, and on top of that fabric you're going to have another fabric that kind of like holds that first fabric together, and then you're going to sew the second fabric on top, generating a little bit of a bumpiness to it and also a little bit more detail. So one thing that's very cool that we can do here is we can select one pattern like this one, and we can right click and do this option called layer clone over or under. You can do whichever. I'm going to use layer clone over, and I'm going to move this to the side right here. When you use layer clone over or under, what's going to happen is you're going to create a copy of that element right there, but it's not going to move on the 3D window, which is very handy because if you already have a nice simulation for the original piece, then just making sure that it's exactly on top of it is very useful. Now, why is this important? Why do we need to create this sort of like puffiness or thickness? Because now we can play with the things that we just learned to give this thing a very nice look. What if we grab this pattern right here, stop the simulation, make it a little bit bigger, okay? Oh, careful there. I'm going to Control C. What's happening here, this is very important. We're going to talk about this on the next exercise. But what's happening here is that when you move this thing around, this thing is actually linked to the previous one. We want to break that link. So I'm going to right click and we're going to do this remove linked editing. I'm going to explain what linked editing is again on the next video. So, or not on the next one, but after the substance video. So linked editing right there. Now we can grab this one right here, this pattern, and I can just scale this up a little bit more. Sorry, pattern. There we go. The whole pattern, not just one line. We're going to scale this up a little bit. It's going to look very weird right here. Don't worry. But now when we simulate, what's going to happen is we're going to have a little bit of an extra loop right there. That's going to give me a little bit of an extra wrinkle as well. Now, here's one amazing thing about Marble Designer. Every single pattern that you create has its own specific properties. So this pattern right here has its own simulation properties. This one right here has its own simulation properties as well. And what you're going to see is that you don't need to have the exact same amount of physical properties for every single pattern. Some patterns like this tablecloth right here, which is quite big, it's perfectly fine with this amount of with this amount of physical or particle distance. But this one's right here could definitely benefit from a smaller number. So I'm going to grab both elements right here. You can, of course, just select them like this. And I'm going to switch this back all the way to 10. Really, really low for this table that we're working with. And you can see if we were to go to the wireframe and surface, then now we're going to have way more divisions. And that's even like relatively low for a piece that's so thin. So I'm going to go all the way down to 5. Now that's looking a little bit better. So now what's going to happen is when we simulate, not only are we going to get more detail on that van, we're going to get a little bit of an extra amount of surface area, and the detail that our whole tablecloth is going to get is going to be way, way nicer. Will this simulation be slower? Definitely. This is going to take a couple more seconds to do. You can see, even though I have a relatively strong system, it's still taking a little bit of time to make sure that everything gets solved. But look at how nice and clean all of those wrinkles are looking. It really looks like there's this puffy sort of like clothing hanging or hugging the edge of our tablecloth. So yeah, that's pretty much it, my friends. That's the physical properties that we have here inside of Marble Designer. And one of the ways in which we are going to be working is we're going to be working with high particle distances. We're going to do all of our patterns. And as we keep polishing those patterns, we're going to start lowering and lowering our particle distance until we get a very high definition mesh. There's a bunch of pipelines from Marble Designer. Some people use this for film or commercial. Some of us, like me, we use it for games. So depending on the pipeline, you're going to be exporting a lower or a higher version of your asset. But usually there's going to be some optimization, and we're going to talk about the retopology a little bit later so that you can see how all of this goes into effect. So yeah, now one of the things that I want to do here, again, like going back into the example, I'm going to grab all of the elements, set this all to 30. So they're going to be really, really low. Let's start the simulation. And I want to like create this table, make it look like something was happening underneath. Maybe there's like a ritual or something that was being hidden by this tablecloth. So I'm just going to start pushing it. I'm just going to move this thing, create an interesting result right here. And I want to have one of the corners almost touching the ground. So let's push this so that we get a little bit more volume there. I don't want this to fall though, so gotta be very careful there. If at any point you're like, okay, this looks good, I don't want to do it anymore, I don't want to like push it anymore, Control K. Control K will freeze the simulation of any specific pattern. So you can do that as well. So yeah, I'm just gonna grab everything now. Well, I'm gonna grab this guy's right here, and I'm pretty certain that 5 is a good number for this ones. And this one right here, I'm gonna set this to 15, so half what we have right now. That's also gonna give me softer wrinkles as well. Let's simulate real quick. Just give it a couple of seconds for things to try to clear out and get nicer wrinkles. As you can see, they kind of like puff out a little bit and then relax. And that's it. I'm gonna stop the video right here. Oh, but before we start, I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna file. I'm gonna save this project. And of course, I'm going to be saving it on the, on our primer here. This is, of course, going to be available for you here in chapter 1. Let's call this tablecloth. When you save this is very important. And I do want to mention this. When you save the file, you will get 2 elements. You're going to get this thing, and you will get a little thumbnail right here. Why do we need the thumbnail? Because when you have the garment on your like little navigator here on the library, you will see the little thumbnail. So it needs to save this little like JPEG of what you're doing. It just looks nice. So yeah, that's it, my friends. Next chapter, and this is the end of this little exercise, this first exercise instead of substance. Look at substance instead of marvelous. Look at what you've been able to do in just like 30 minutes. So it's just substance material. We're going to talk about substance materials and how to make this thing look even better. So hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next one.